Imagine being 4 years old, your tiny hands gripping the side mirror of a car, your sneakers dangling above the asphalt, your heart pounding so hard it feels like it might burst. You're begging not to be left behind, terrified that if you stay, something terrible will happen. That little girl was Farnoosh Torabi, and that moment of raw fear would become one of the defining stories of her life. Most people would laugh it off as a childhood overreaction. But Farnoosh? She would later realize that what looked like weakness was actually something else entirely, fear doing its best to protect her. And that's the daring promise of this book. What if fear isn't our enemy? What if fear isn't weakness? What if fear is actually a friend, a teacher, a guide, maybe even a superpower? We live in a culture obsessed with being fearless. From motivational speeches to Instagram captions, we're told to crush fear, ignore fear, overcome fear. But Farnoosh Torabi flips the script. She says fear is not here to hold you back. It's here to point the way forward. If you listen closely enough, fear reveals your deepest values, your strongest desires, and the truths you can't afford to ignore. Over the course of her life, as a daughter of Iranian immigrants, as a financial expert in high-stakes media, as a wife, mother, and entrepreneur, Farnoosh learned that fear doesn't disappear when you succeed. It doesn't dissolve when you make money or reach milestones. In fact, the more meaningful the decision, the louder fear speaks. And instead of silencing it, she learned to ask, what is fear trying to teach me right now? To answer that question, she explores 9 universal fears, the ones that creep into our careers, our relationships, and our choices whether we want them to or not. And in this journey, she shows us how each fear, when faced with curiosity, transforms from an enemy into an ally. Let's begin with rejection, that familiar sting of not being wanted, not being chosen, not being enough. Farnoosh remembers this vividly from childhood. Walking into classrooms with an unusual name, unwrapping lunches of potato and parsley sandwiches while classmates stared, trying desperately to blend in with a new black sweater and stirrup pants from Sears. What she wanted most wasn't money or status, it was belonging. And yet, rejection seemed to follow her everywhere. Once, when she bravely sat next to a girl in class hoping to make a new friend, the girl looked her up and down and giggled, "Are you a nun?" It was meant as a joke, but to a little girl longing for acceptance, it cut deep. Rejection, as Farnoosh explains, is hardwired into us. In tribal times, rejection could mean death. Being cast out of the group meant facing predators alone. That ancient wiring still lives in us today, making every no feel like a threat to survival. But here's the twist. Rejection also carries wisdom. It tells us where we're forcing ourselves into spaces that don't fit. It pushes us to double down on who we really are. It shows us where our energy is better spent. As a young journalist, Farnoosh once held back from negotiating her salary out of fear of being rejected. She stayed silent in rooms where she had something to say because she didn't want to look foolish. She even downplayed her ambition on dates, worried that being too career-driven would scare men away. But over time, she realized rejection was not here to shrink her. It was here to sharpen her. Every no from a job or a publisher wasn't proof she wasn't good enough. It was a clue about where she needed to grow, or a nudge toward places where her voice would truly be valued. Take her nerve-wracking appearance on the Today Show. She had spent weeks rehearsing her lines, trying to be perfectly likable. But under pressure, she blurted out something awkward, something that could have ended her credibility on live television. Instead of burying her career, that blunder made her more relatable. Viewers saw not a polished expert, but a real person who stumbled, who got back up, who kept going. Her fear of rejection in that moment had stripped away the script and forced her to show up as herself. And that, ironically, is what won people over. The lesson? Rejection is not the end of the road. It's redirection. It's fear whispering. Stop pretending. Stop chasing approval. Start standing where you are truly seen and loved. Now, let's move to loneliness. Another fear that shadows us quietly. Few things feel heavier than the thought of being alone. Unwanted, unseen, forgotten. For Farnoosh, growing up as the daughter of immigrants in a mostly white town, loneliness wasn't abstract. It was the ache of sitting at lunch tables where she didn't fit in, the shame of hearing her name butchered by substitute teachers, the longing to be just normal. At times, she even tried changing her name. Tina, Ashley, Nikki, hoping a simpler identity might grant her belonging. But none of those names stuck. The loneliness followed her. It's easy to think loneliness is proof that something's wrong with us. But Farnoosh came to see it differently. Loneliness can also be a signal, a reminder to reconnect with yourself, to ask, what do I really need right now? Sometimes, loneliness pushes us toward communities that will truly value us, instead of keeping us trapped in places where we're merely tolerated. She recalls the shift when her family moved to Pennsylvania, where diversity was greater and she finally felt the freedom to be herself. Suddenly, her unusual name became a nickname of affection, Noosh, Nooshi, and doors began to open. She tried out for the tennis team, auditioned for school plays, spoke up in class. The loneliness she had carried for so long had taught her something priceless. You don't have to twist yourself into knots for belonging. The right people will meet you where you are. Loneliness, then, is not a curse but a catalyst. It shows us where connection is missing and pushes us to seek deeper, truer bonds. It invites us to fill our own cup first, so that when others come along, we're not clinging to them out of desperation but choosing them out of strength. Think about the last time you felt it, that gnawing restlessness as you scrolled through your phone, watching everyone else's lives flash in perfect little squares. A friend buys their dream house. A colleague starts a new business. Someone you barely know is on a beach in Bali while you're sitting at home staring at your to-do list. That sinking feeling? That's FOMO, the fear of missing out. Farnoosh knows this fear well. For years, she wrestled with it not just socially, but professionally. She saw peers climbing faster, landing dream jobs, signing book deals. And every time, the voice of FOMO whispered, "You're behind. You're losing. Everyone else is ahead of you." But here's the catch. FOMO doesn't actually point to what we're missing. It points to what we think we should want. The glossy highlight reels of others make us question our own path. But Farnoosh invites us to dig deeper. Instead of asking, "What am I missing out on?" she asks, "What do I truly want to experience?" When she was younger, FOMO tempted her into career moves that weren't right for her. She considered paths that looked glamorous on the outside but felt hollow inside. Only when she began asking what fear was trying to tell her did she uncover the truth. FOMO was a mirror, showing her the gap between what she really valued and what she was chasing for approval. And when she listened, the noise quieted. She stopped comparing and started choosing experiences aligned with her values: family, creativity, meaningful work. So the next time you feel FOMO rise, don't drown it with distractions. Ask it a question. Is this really what I want? Or am I borrowing someone else's dream? That shift changes everything. Then comes the fear of exposure, the dread of being seen too clearly, of the world peering in and deciding you're not enough. In today's world, exposure feels inevitable. Every social post, every presentation, every meeting carries the risk of scrutiny. And Farnoosh, as a journalist and public figure, has lived this fear under bright lights. She recalls one of her most humiliating moments. On national TV, speaking live, she accidentally said something careless, something that could have been interpreted as offensive. In that instant, she felt stripped bare. The cameras, the crew, the millions of unseen eyes. She wanted to disappear. Exposure had found her. But what happened next surprised her. Instead of ending her career, that slip made her more human. Viewers didn't see a fraud. They saw a real person, someone who stumbled and recovered. The fear of exposure had forced her to embrace imperfection, to let go of the mask of being perfectly polished. Exposure, she realized, isn't always an enemy, can also be a teacher. It reminds us to draw boundaries, to decide what's worth sharing and what's sacred. It nudges us to step into vulnerability with intention, not recklessness. And it reminds us that when people see the cracks in our armor, they often connect with us more deeply. But perhaps the fear that stalks us most quietly and most powerfully is uncertainty. We want guarantees. We crave security. We plan, predict, and prepare as if life can be neatly mapped out. Yet deep down, we know the truth. Nothing is certain. Jobs vanish. Relationships shift. Economies crash. The world can change overnight. Farnoosh admits she has lived much of her life gripped by uncertainty. Growing up in an immigrant household, her parents taught her to play it safe. Stability was the goal. But as she grew older, she realized that fear of uncertainty had also made her resilient. It taught her to prepare, yes, but also to adapt. When her career path veered, when opportunities dissolved, when risks loomed, uncertainty became the space where new possibilities could appear. She tells the story of her decision to leave a stable job in media to pursue her own projects. The uncertainty was terrifying. What if she failed? What if she couldn't pay the bills? What if her family suffered because of her choice? But when she leaned into the fear, she discovered something else. Uncertainty also meant freedom. It meant she wasn't locked into one script. It meant she could build something of her own. The very thing that scared her most, the not knowing, was the thing that allowed her to step into a bigger life. Uncertainty, she says, is like standing at the edge of a foggy road. You can't see all the way to the end. But fear is there to remind you, you don't need the whole map to take the next step. Move forward with caution, with awareness, but move forward. The fog will lift as you go. Now let's talk about one of the loudest fears of all: money. 3 out of 4 Americans say they're anxious about their finances. That means money outranks death, politics, and even conversations about sex as a source of stress. And Farnoosh knows this intimately, not just as a financial journalist, but as a daughter of immigrants who grew up with money worries woven into daily life. Money fear shows up in countless ways. We worry we'll never have enough. We worry we'll lose what we've worked so hard to earn. We worry our choices will disappoint the people we love. It's no wonder that money can feel less like paper and numbers, and more like a measure of our worth, our safety, and even our identity. On her podcast, So Money, Farnoosh has fielded thousands of questions that sound like they're about dollars, but really they're about fear. A man wonders if he should leave his high-paying tech job to open a salon, his dream. But beneath the question about income lies a deeper terror. If I leave, will I betray my immigrant parents who sacrificed so much for me to have a safe career? A young couple wants to talk about money before marriage, but they're paralyzed by the fear that honesty will spark conflict, maybe even break them apart. Investors wonder if it's ever the right time to start. What if they lose everything? Money, in other words, is rarely just about money. It's about belonging, approval, identity, and survival. Farnoosh admits that money fear shaped her too. Early in her career, she stayed silent instead of negotiating her salary. She worried that asking for more would brand her as greedy or ungrateful. She carried debt and felt the shame of wondering if she'd ever get ahead. But as she grew, she began to see what fear was trying to tell her. It wasn't saying, don't ask, don't risk. It was saying, slow down, protect yourself, make careful moves. Money fear wasn't a stop sign. It was a compass. When she finally learned to listen, she stopped letting fear paralyze her and started letting it prepare her. Instead of never negotiating, she researched, practiced, and walked into salary talks ready. Instead of avoiding investing, she educated herself, started small, and built confidence step by step. Money fear became not a barrier but a signal. Pay attention here, this matters. And that brings us to a fear closely related to money but even more universal, the fear of failure. If money fear is about survival, failure fear is about identity. We dread the sting of trying and falling short, of seeing our dreams crumble, of hearing people say, I told you so. Failure feels final, like proof that we're not cut out for what we wanted. Farnoosh has met this fear many times. When her first book came out, she feared it would flop. When she walked into high-stakes interviews, she feared she'd blow her chance. When she considered leaving a stable paycheck to pursue her own business, failure loomed over her like a shadow. But here's the paradox. Every time she failed, she didn't shatter. She learned. She grew stronger. She found redirection. She remembers a colleague, Sean, who dreamed of moving from behind the newsroom desk to an on-air role. He feared rejection so much that he almost never tried. But eventually, fear of failure became its own teacher. It showed him that the only way forward was through. When his boss inevitably said, not yet, Sean didn't crumble. He took the feedback, built his skills, moved to a smaller market, and worked his way up. Today, he's a respected reporter. That initial failure was not a dead end, it was a training ground. Farnoosh says failure fear often disguises itself as perfectionism. We tell ourselves we're not ready yet, that we need one more degree, one more year, one more guarantee before we begin. But failure fear is really asking, do you have the courage to try knowing you might stumble? Because the truth is, The only true failure is refusing to try at all. She shares her own story of bombing a line on national television, of tripping over words in an interview, of getting rejected from 80% of the colleges she applied to. Each one felt devastating at the time, but each one carried her closer to the life she has now. Failure wasn't the opposite of success. It was the path to it. So the next time failure fear rises, Farnoosh urges us not to silence it, but to thank it. It's reminding us that what we're about to do matters deeply, that the stakes are real, that our heart is in it. Failure fear is proof of our courage, not the absence of it. There's a fear we don't talk about much, though it quietly shapes everything. Endings. The end of a relationship. The end of a career. The end of a chapter we thought would last forever. Even the end of life itself. Endings scare us because they force us to face loss. They remind us that nothing is permanent, that every story has a final page. Farnoosh has wrestled with this fear through heartbreaks, career pivots, and even the slow fading of dreams she once thought would define her life. She admits that when something ends, her first instinct is panic. She wants to hold on, to rescue what's slipping away. But over time, she discovered something surprising. Endings are not always tragedies. They're also invitations. She remembers the moment she realized her job in traditional media was no longer serving her. On paper, it was perfect, steady paycheck, prestige, security. But inside, it was over. She was drained, uninspired, restless. The ending of that chapter was terrifying. Would she ever find something better? Would she regret leaving? But once she let it end, space opened up. She found podcasting, writing, and projects that aligned far more closely with her values. That ending was really a beginning in disguise. Endings, as fear teaches, are proof that something mattered. The pain of goodbye means there was love, meaning, purpose. And when we allow endings, we also allow new seeds to grow. Fear isn't saying, cling harder. It's saying, honor what was and trust what comes next. Then there's the fear of losing freedom, the fear of being trapped, controlled, or caged by commitments. This fear often whispers when we consider big life choices. Marriage, parenthood, mortgages, careers. What if I get stuck? What if I can't leave? What if my life becomes smaller than I dreamed? Farnoosh admits this fear hit her hardest when she thought about marriage and family. As a fiercely independent woman, she worried. Would she lose herself? Would she sacrifice her freedom in the name of stability? Would love become a cage? But when she listened closely, she realized the fear wasn't warning her against commitment. It was guiding her to make commitments consciously. Freedom isn't about having no ties at all. It's about choosing the right ties, the ones that expand rather than shrink you. Her marriage didn't trap her. It gave her a partner who encouraged her independence. Motherhood didn't erase her career. It gave her a new reason to pursue it with even more passion. The fear of losing freedom, in other words, is a guardrail. It reminds us to say yes with intention, to avoid paths that suffocate us, and to design lives where freedom and connection can coexist. And that brings us to the heart of Farnoosh's message. We spend so much time running from fear, pretending it doesn't exist, shaming ourselves for feeling it. But what if fear is not the enemy? What if fear is the map? Rejection teaches authenticity. Loneliness teaches self-trust. FOMO teaches clarity. Exposure teaches boundaries. Uncertainty teaches resilience. Money teaches values. Failure teaches courage. Endings teach renewal. And the fear of losing freedom teaches conscious choice. Farnoosh doesn't claim she's fearless. Not even close. She's still the woman who double-checks locks at night, who sometimes imagines the worst-case scenario, who can spiral into worry. But she no longer sees fear as weakness. She sees it as a partner. A sometimes difficult, sometimes annoying, but always honest partner. So the next time fear shows up in your life, and it will, don't silence it. Don't shame it. Don't shove it down. Instead, get curious. Ask, what are you trying to tell me? What do you want me to protect? What do you want me to honor? Because fear, at its core, is not here to stop you. It's here to guide you. And when you learn to listen, you discover what Farnoosh calls a healthy state of panic. A life where fear doesn't cage you, but fuels you. A life where your most anxious moments become your most powerful teachers. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that fear isn't the opposite of freedom. It's the pathway to it.